All right, good afternoon, Chair Postman, member Vollendorf, staff and guests. The lobbies are open and the recording has begun.
Good afternoon, everybody. We will convene the LCB Executive Management Team meeting for Wednesday, August 10th, 2022. Our first item, as reflected in the agenda, is an executive session. We're going into executive session to discuss legal matters relating to litigation or potential litigation to which the agency is or likely to become a party. I expect the executive session will conclude at 2, so we're going to give it 30 minutes. If we finish early, we'll come back and let you know, but we still have to wait till 2:30 to
2 o'clock.
2 o'clock. I'm sorry, 1:30 to 2 o'clock. And then we'll reconvene. If we need to go long, we'll come back and let you know and extend. So with that, we're going to just stand at ease for a second until Dustin does his magic and puts us into executive session for 30 minutes. The board's completed its executive session, but we're a little ahead of the clock. So we're going to stand at ease till 2 p.m. and we'll reconvene the meeting then.
Doesn't realize that everyone has that reaction to it. So, just a policy, and then it's,
Yeah, that's right. Prior notice.
yeah, it's so official. And that's- I'm like, what, are you quitting? That's what I was thinking. I'm like,
Okay, so they can't hear us. They can.
just a little late.
It's okay, I'm not really being laid off. But you can stop celebrating. Okay, it's 2:00. We will reconvene the executive management team meeting in open session and return to the rest of our agenda. Our first report today comes from Jim Weatherly, our diversity, equity, and inclusion manager. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Chair
Do we
Postman.
need to give him this mic or can he come forward? That'd be good. Flip that around.
Good afternoon, Chair Postman, and thank you, everybody, for the opportunity to speak today. It's a strange setup right now, so I apologize to those on camera. So yes, we're doing an update on the pair planning right now for the LCB. That's our pro-equity, anti-racism efforts in conjunction and support of the Office of Equity. So currently, our LCB team consists of 10 members and growing. We're still trying to kind of bring some more people in. There are pieces of the team that are not fully realized yet. So some examples of that might be a tribal liaison from the agency within, and certainly our community stakeholders. And so I just wanted to also say in support of the work Jessica Dang's doing, especially this living wage compensation policy piece that we'll be adding to this, which will, I think, be a nice supplement to the community, aspect opinion on how we're going to do this work internally. So far we've had 4 meetings just as a pair team and a 5th meeting that we did in conjunction with our diversity council members here. That 5th meeting that we did in tandem was to kind of explore an article that the Office of Equity cites on their resource page around white supremacy structure. It's a fairly well-known article, very well researched from the late 90s from Dr. Tima Kuhn. And so she has done since an update on that article, May of 2021. So we spent some time at the end of July talking through what that looks like, some pitfalls, some blind spots, and things that we can all do to adjust to be more inclusive in terms of how we plan and strategize. So that's one of the things that we've done most recently. The other things I would say about this team and talking with other DEI managers around the state is that it's a slow process to go as fast as we need to be going for these deadlines. For us, it's a matter of everybody getting to know one another, just building these relationships, let alone being able to kind of throw out there what doesn't feel safe internally and externally. It's also this time of COVID where I think everybody's having to reintroduce themselves to the world. So we're doing that. And so far, we've only been able to do that virtually versus the setting that we're in now, this sort of hybrid model. So I think we're looking forward to having some more in-person, especially when we have community members engaged with this process too. I would say some of the setbacks also that we are kind of experiencing as an agency right now, it's more of the storming phase before the norming of this. There's certainly some fear at play, information that just hasn't been necessarily more publicly shared in terms of things like white fragility. That's a topic that we're going to look at, and just fear in general, but trying to do it in a way that makes sense in this agency and around the language that we use and the culture that's established. And that's something that I think other DEI managers are struggling with in some ways, but also trying to figure out how do we still represent who we are as an agency and make this fit. So those are some of the pieces that we're talking about right now. We are also in the middle of deadline month. So between this equity assessment that we needed to start doing internally for the past 3 months or so, we're also on deadline for a strategic plan that'll be due to the Office of Equity on September 1st. So we have a series of meetings happening this month to kind of wrap that up and get to a starting place with this. The nice thing is from September through the end of October, the Office of Equity has graciously offered to do consult if necessary. And I think that's something that we'll be kind of leaning more towards or into so we can have some bigger conversations, especially for an agency as small as we are, how we can be more intertwined, how we can continue to do this work. So that's one of the pieces that we're looking at right now. One of the other pieces of that strategic plan is there were 11 service lines that were identified as options from the Office of Equity. So for us to determine which of those three, which is the requirement for the strategic plan, we really needed to do an assessment. So again, I wanted to thank Jessica Dang and others from management team for kind of setting the groundwork with this latest strategic plan that we have. What we did and what she specifically did was really analyze what's already in our new strategic plan, layer it with these service lines, what those definitions look like, also in tandem with King County's determinants of equity, those 14 that King County had in place, the 15th that the Office of Equity added around digital equity. So we looked at all of that, we layered it, and that was kind of our scoring process that we did to get to the three. So the three that we've decided to pursue, at least for this first year strategic plan, would be engagement and community partnerships, workforce equity, and public communications and education. So those are the topics that we're getting ready to kind of put forth in this strategic plan that'll be due, and also looking at it through management team, certainly the board, executive. So one of the other things that's coming soon with this process is this article, this Dr. Akun's article. It is something that when Rick and I talked recently that is now required reading for the management team. So we will be exploring that article, all 32 pages of the updated one here, I believe, mid-September as a management team group, and kind of just talking through what that might look like. And then in following that up, we also have been graciously invited over to the Education and Enforcement's retreat that's happening here in September as well. So we're putting together some sort of panel conversation to, again, support the efforts, but also get to know E&E a bit better and understand what their needs are also. So I think that's going to be a good conversation and a nice step that we need to have in order to be successful as a pair team also. And then the other piece that Rick is working on right now too is I think he's purchased book copies of Merritt Long, our previous board chair's recent autobiography book. There are copies that he's purchased for all of us, EMT, the board, our pair team, our diversity council. So I think that is going to be a mandatory reading that we're going to be doing heading into the fall that I think will be supportive of where we're trying to go here in these efforts. And then the other thing that we are trying to finalize or formalize, I guess, as a pair team is standing meetings. You know, the last DEI statewide manager call that we had last week was made pretty clear because we had a guest speaker who was Dr. Karen Johnson, just talking about continuing to have these pair teams, but also thinking about it more through a lens or just a way of life. And so it kind of reminded me of all the lean efforts that we've done in state service for many years and how that's just sort of a normalized thing. And so what we're going to be doing in this month is figuring out when those standardized meetings are going to happen, how often we're going to do it, certainly in tandem with the supervisors, the directors here to make sure. I mean, it's a lot to juggle right now between FTE shortages, just the season that we're in, et cetera. So there are a lot of factors at play. And, you know, there are times even on the drive over today where I feel like we're maybe a bit behind on this, but in kind of pulling my head up and talking with others in other agencies, I think we're in a pretty good spot right now, even with some of the storming right now. That's to be expected. It's part of kind of that natural, you know, getting used to this. And so I'm really proud of this team so far, the work and the vulnerability that they've shown as we try to create some safer spaces to have some harder conversations that we know happen day to day for many people that are working or not working in state service. And so we're getting closer to that. And I think the next time you see us report out, you will see more of those metrics, those things that we as state employees are so used to having to do it, but also trying to figure out a way to plain speak that. And I think having that community impact is going to be highly valuable for us. And I hope, you know, in return to the community at large. So that's our latest right now on that.
Okay. I do have a few questions, but I wanted to give Member Vollendorf a chance to talk. I know he's been active.
Yes, he is an active
And
member.
I just, because we don't get a chance to talk about these things, I'd love to hear your thoughts and how you think it's going and what
Yeah,
the
thank
path
you.
looks like to you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And thank you, Jim, for the update. I was just going to add that because I've been participating in the pair groups, I am somewhat familiar with the updates that were just given. Some were new, but I really appreciate it. The diversity, equity, and inclusion is important. And I think it's nice to see the work that's going into it, the different sections of the LCB leaning into it. It is hard work. It's uncomfortable work at different times, but it's important work. And I appreciate the leadership, Jim, that you've shown, and I appreciate the leaning in I've seen from different sections of the LCB, demonstrating to me that everybody sees this as important to the work that we do, despite the fact that there can be, some challenges. And it's so multi-factored and so multi-layered when you start talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. You factor in race, you factor in gender, you factor in sexual orientation, age, etc. I mean, it's just so multi-layered, and I think that we've got a good approach and good leadership in this area. So thank you.
It's good to hear. So a couple questions. You mentioned the not yet to the public engagement part of this for our team. What does that look like? What is either the requirement or the goal there? How do we do it?
Some examples, like in other agencies, they've put together some messaging that's gone out, sort of a call to action. If you're interested in this type of work, please let us know. That's one option that I've seen done before. Otherwise, for us, it's still that gathering stage of what agencies, what organizations have we had long time relationships established with. Again, I'll cite E&E. Doing ride-alongs, as many of us know, you learn very quickly that they're plugged into the community. So those are great resources to be able to tap into and say, we'd love to hear more for you, or what was your experiences like? So those are kind of the options that we have right there, but we haven't fully realized how we want that language to look and feel and how we want to roll that out also.
Yeah. And when you talk about the coming deadline on your strategic plan, and I don't know what the timing will be like, but hopefully we'll have a chance to share that with the other board members before it gets submitted. But maybe it'll end up being during that time of consultation. I don't know, because the clock, but
Right.
One way or the other. I mean, I'm glad Jim's there, but Ollie and I, I'm sure, want to put eyes on it at some point. But,
No, for sure.
Yeah,
We
cool.
absolutely would want to do that and make sure that, that piece is covered.
Yeah. Jim Vollendorf, did you have a question?
I was just going to make a quick comment based on your question, David, and that is around community participation. That's one of the things that I've offered to help in specifically. I have a lot of experience in King County working with community and assuring participation, and I strongly believe in community participation and individual participation in public policy. And so I've offered to lean in that particular area and offer, my experience, guidance, and expertise in there, and we'll continue to do that. I think it's super important.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks. And the last thing I was wondering, when you talk about it's not easy, and you got this pair group and they can be hard conversations. In a way, is that the easiest though conversation? Because these are people who have volunteered to say, let's go have these tough conversations. What does that tell you about the difficulty when we step out of that self-selecting group and go to the rest of the agency?
I mean, I think it tells us that there's a lot more work to do. And, from working in tribal government, what we learn in that setting is it's not what we're saying, it's what we're not saying. So the silence, the lack of participation isn't lost on me.
Right.
And thinking about what work might be needed, what might need to be better teased out or explained to make people feel like they're welcome to this space.
Mm-hmm.
And for us, as a visual, some members have expressed versus a square table, it's a circle table, and there are many seats at said table for this. So we're going to have to think about that. That's a big one. And so that's why I'm also happy in terms of the divisions represented. Communication plays a huge piece of that, both in this pair team and also our council as well. So it's nice to have that expertise and wisdom there to kind of help us guide and think about those things.
Great, cool. Okay, thank you. Any last words, Jim B?
David, just one other comment about that. We talked at one of the pair team meetings, and I believe this to be true. When you think about, I like to go with the 20-60-20 rule. 20% of people are just there. They get all of this, and they don't need to be brought along. 60% of people, given the right information, are going to come along. They just need the right information, they need the right tools, they need the right resources, they need to understand this. 20% of people may never get there. If we can get that 60% people to join the earlier 20%, then we're making a lot of good progress. And the vast majority of people, I think, are really ready to engage in the conversation. They just need the right tools, resources, and information to get there.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you.
You're
Nice to
welcome.
see you.
Thank you.
Appreciate
Yeah,
it.
likewise.
We've moved a couple of things around on the agenda for those following at home. We are going to now hear from Tony Hood, our Deputy Director for a General Agency Update. Hi, Tony.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Postman, Member Vollendorf. I have 5 updates, 5 topics to touch on today. The first one is we had a great training on July 25th regarding managing in the hybrid space. We had someone from the Lenaker team come, and I'm happy to say that we had 73 managers and supervisors attend virtually, and that we highly encourage that they participate, but wasn't mandatory. So that's the vast majority of our managers and supervisors who attended this. It was a 90-minute training, so it was very doable with everyone's busy schedules. We had breakout rooms, which I thought were great. Personally, it gave me the opportunity to talk to managers and supervisors from multiple divisions together at the same time, which I never have an opportunity to do. I think when I think of DEI, I think about ways that we could have conversations through electronic means and do breakout groups. I know that they use Zoom often instead of Teams to do those, but it's a nice way to facilitate discussion, even if it's a brief discussion. And so I enjoyed that, and I think other people did too. I will follow up on the surveys that they did for the Lenaker team, because I'd like to find out if we should entertain doing more trainings with that team, because they certainly have a lot more to offer. The second item I have is our systems modernization project. We, as you know, we did our RFP, we rated the vendors, we had presentations, and one vendor was asked to go to the next phase, and that is our internal planning workshops, and those are happening next week. And those are key so that LCB and the vendor understand exactly what deliverables we want, and that we're on the same page about what will be in the contract. And so that's going to take a full week, if not longer, because this is such a complex contract. And we have to make sure that when we say Apple, they know what they think the same kind of Apple that we're thinking of. That's such a simple analogy, but you know,
There's a lot of different
if they're
apples,
thinking Granny Smith and
That's
we're
right.
thinking
Good.
Fuji, that's a pretty
Cosmic
different
crisp,
taste.
yeah.
You know, that's
Yeah.
a different
Speaking
taste.
my language now.
It's a different, you know, we don't want our function, we don't want them to produce a function for licensing that is not what licensing wants.
Yeah.
So we are taking all the necessary time to make sure that our internal planning workshops are thorough. And the third item I have is just to let you know that the management team is going to do some team building on the 30th. I'm excited for that. We have 2 very enthusiastic trainers coming from HCA. They love doing this with teams, and they have a prepared session. And so we're going to give them time to do team building with us. And I think that will be great. We haven't had a whole lot of opportunity to do that because we're so busy and we've been virtual. And so I look forward to that. The next item I have is strategic planning. Jessica is meeting with different groups to find out where they are on the strategic plan action items that they had. And so she will meet with those groups in August and see where we're at. And, you know, sometimes those action items naturally get done through our regular work. And sometimes we need to remind ourselves to put them back at the top so we can move them forward. So I'm very happy that she is on that. And we're very lucky to have her help us with that. The last thing I have is the employee survey. It comes out in the fall, and Anita sent all of management team the opportunity to review the questions and see if we want to add or change anything. She said there weren't any additional questions that people had. There are DEI questions which have been added by the whole state, which will be included in the employee survey. There's been some discussion about anonymity with answering that, and whether the breakdown of groups is losing some of that. And so we're analyzing that because we want it to be anonymous. We want people to feel comfortable, but we also want to know if there's a specific group that is particularly struggling or a specific group that's particularly flourishing. We'd also like to know that. So
Some are sort of small.
yeah, some are sort of
Yeah.
small. So we're balancing that and she's getting feedback on that. And that's all I have today.
Okay, good. On the adding questions, I always think there must be something. I mean, it's a great opportunity to put something on there, but I guess I don't have anything off the top of my head either, but.
Well, I believe tomorrow's the deadline.
Okay, well then I won't even try to think.
So you'd have to come up with one tonight.
Yeah,
It
no,
would
that's,
have to be off the top of your head.
yeah, I was gonna say, that's unlikely then. I'll skip that. Okay. Any questions for Tony, Jim? No, okay, great. Thanks, Tony. And we'll turn it over to Chandra Beatty, the Director of Enforcement and Education.
Thank you. And thank you for the opportunity to share data with you of the great work the education and enforcement team is doing. As always, I'll start running through the data. You can ask questions as we go or at the end. I'm fine with either. Dustin is going to drive because he does such a fabulous job. Perfect. We'll go ahead and get started. I usually skip right over this slide. One of the things that my staff pointed out to me this week when we reviewed these together is that these numbers are actually up 3% from pre-COVID numbers. So we might have made different assumptions about that if we had taken a guess. And so I just thought that was an interesting fact when it was shared. So I was going to pass that on to you. And then we look at complaints by industry. Just so you know, this includes external complaints and internal complaints. Complaints, in addition to being a way we receive information from the public about folks who may not be following the law. Complaints are also a way for us to track cases. So when we walk into a place on a premise check and potentially see something we need to provide a warning or education about, we will enter it as a complaint.
Could you at some point, and just on a one-time basis, I'd love to see that split between
split is?
outside complaints and internal complaints. I've always wondered about that.
Yep, I will get that. Moving on, I just did a breakdown. You'll remember that this right column used to be the percentage of complaints that were related to COVID. And we watched that number drop to 0 and did a slide presentation where we got to celebrate it being at 0. And now we've decided to start looking at the percentage of complaints we receive that are specifically public safety complaints. An interesting note, something we're watching statistically, is over the past few months, that number, that percentage that's related to public safety has increased by about 5%. I'm not sure if that's just something that we'll see for a few months or if
Is
that's
sale
going to
minors
continue
public
to.
safety?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, that's my
So,
guess.
yeah, so you will see that consistent theme throughout.
Is that the only thing that when you talk about public safety, is it exclusively sales to minor, or are there other things that are included in that category?
No, there are other things. So for example, over service, sales to minors, there are a number of things in that category. But obviously when we're out there doing compliance checks, you will see those numbers go up because it is a public safety category.
Thank you.
Education and violation. So as you know, our philosophy is that we start by using our education warning tools to help people gain compliance. And then when folks make it clear that their goal is not to gain compliance, we switch over and start using some of our enforcement tools. And what I really like about when staff presents these slides to me, I can really see that in our data. I can see that that's what we're doing. And I'm going to point that out to you later on in the slides where it actually visibly happens. But here I want to remind you, when you look at this data, the lighter, maybe lavender blue periwinkle slide is 2021 impacted by COVID. And then the dark column is 2022, and that's really impacted by staffing. And so you'll start to see some of our numbers in 2022 not as high as we would expect them to be. And we're at 38 vacancies, really feeling the impact of those vacancies. So just something to be aware of and watch as we go through. You'll also see here over in the center column on the right, the light blue and the notices to correct. Last year, those were at 172 for the year in cannabis, and we're already at 139 for a little over half the year. So the cannabis team is really using that tool to deliver a stronger message than a warning, but not quite an AVN, which is what it was intended to. So it's good to see that tool being used. And then again, when we start to look at just the quarter for licensee education, you can see that those numbers are down, and I can equate to staffing. One of the things I look forward to watching over the coming month is we just recently implemented a monthly report, a supervisory tool, if you will, so we can start to see, is everyone entering all of their education? And so I would tell you that they're not.
Okay.
And so this will help us get there and have a little bit more accurate numbers to be reflective of how much it's impacted by staffing and how much it's impacted by potentially a need to do some better data entry. When we start to look at those education contacts by year per industry, and this is year to date, you can see that we're increasing the amount of education we're doing in cannabis. So that cannabis team is still out there doing that work, and then we're decreased in liquor. But also, we need to recognize that in 2020 and 2021, those numbers were really impacted by COVID, and we were out there doing a lot of complaint-driven education to help people get in compliance. And then this is just a breakdown by month, and so you can see how that work over the last quarter really breaks out for each industry. Pretty consistent, actually. So if we look specifically at July and education, there's no change in the top 5 topics. So there's nothing surprising here, especially when you look at by industry. We're doing regulatory education. We're getting out there and talking about youth access and public safety. So that's all really solid, consistent performance. We start to look at the violation breakdowns for 2022. Again, the darker column are the warnings. The dark blue column is AVNs for both liquor and tobacco. And again, when you get over to the right side and start looking at cannabis, you'll see a heavy use of that NTC tool, which is really good to see. That was the intent of the legislature and the agency when we started using that tool. And then if we break down those NTCs specifically, one of the things I want to highlight for you, there is some change here. So on the final one, engaging in non-retail conditional sales, that's new this month. So we saw a few of those show up on our top 5. And then
What is that?
So that is, I'm requiring you to buy this product in order to get this thing
like
too.
from distributor processor to retail.
Yes, or even to a consumer. I'm not sure which particular this is, but it's requiring purchase of one thing to get another, essentially. And then the third item down, non-compliance with record-keeping requirements. I just want to point that out because you'll see we have this showing up in NTC, and later you're going to see it showing up in an AVN. And so when I saw that new topic, frankly, it's a non-under 21 topic, show up as an AVN, I said, is this a situation where we've done that stair-stepping? And they pulled me back to this slide and said, absolutely, here it is. So it's just really good to see that show up in the data. And then exactly like I promised, when we start looking at AVNs and the top 5 topics, well, there we have a new, as you remember, the last few months, almost every time we look at this, it's that youth access topic and selling restricted product to folks under the age of 21. But here, on the 4th one down, we have 2 of these show up for non-compliance with record-keeping requirements. But we were able to look back and see how the warnings had happened, the notice to corrects had happened. And so that's a really good progression that we're seeing there. And then again, the warning topics, not a lot of change here. This is really great data this month. We are seeing great performance in our goal to resolve everything at the lowest level possible. So you can see we're resolving the majority of these as uncontested or at informal hearing. Same thing in the cannabis industry. We had 1 in cannabis go straight to formal, way back in May, nothing in the last 2 months. And then we had one in July from liquor go straight to formal. So just really good effort and good work being put in by our adjudication unit there. Liquor compliance, youth access, the numbers we're all waiting for, 83% in the month of July, a good solid 185 compliance checks out there being conducted by our enforcement and education staff. This does not include delivery or curbside, and I just want to make sure everybody's sitting down because it's not good news I'm about to give to you. So we completed 7 delivery and curbside compliance checks this month. 5 delivery and 2 curbside, and out of 7 attempts, we had 7 sales. So that's still not going well. I texted to try to get the number of third-party folks that were part of that, and I just didn't get it prior to the meeting, which is okay. I can follow up with that. I will tell you that I did ask about a particular company that we've been working really hard with, and we've had 19 attempts with that company and 19 sales. So not in the last month, just over the past few months. Yeah. And so it's definitely something that we're chatting with the industry about and just providing information and education.
Yeah, deeply disturbing.
It is.
And we should find time to have more conversations about this. I'm sure the board would like to.
Yeah, I've had some really direct, we've met directly with some of the third party folk. Some have been more responsive than other. Notice there wasn't an S on there.
Mm-hmm.
And I've also had some pretty direct conversations with the industry because the industry is working really hard to try to address this problem.
And I've heard their frustration too.
Yeah.
But ultimately.
So this is really disappointing considering
Yeah.
one of our priorities is to prevent youth access to restricted products. And it's definitely something that we look forward to continue working with the industry and the board on. And I know that Justin's team is overseeing a study also, so it's a priority. And then because of all the things going on everywhere else, cannabis gets passed this month. They had 0 checks conducted, so you can consider that a 0% or 100%. And they've done so well, I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt and give them 100% this month.
Right.
And then we look at tobacco vapor, and they're historically kind of their numbers jump a little bit more, and they're at 89%, so they're up for the month of July. When we start to look at premise checks, this is really just you seeing your officers getting out into the field, having contact with our licensees. But we put a little graph up here on the right side, on the right-hand side, so you can see the percentage of locations that we're visiting. And we're changing some of our practices so that instead of visiting one place 4 and 5 times, we're trying to get to more of our locations. But there's a balance there, right? Then if you have a problem location, you probably need to be there 4 and 5 times. Add on top of that some of our vacancies and staffing struggles, and you can see the problem. So it's just constantly a balance of trying to do what helps us address public safety most at the moment. You will see that cannabis is at 67% of their locations, and also they're overseeing 832 licenses. So there's a balance. And then liquor has visited 40% and tobacco vapor at 22%. So they're out there doing great work. ID checks, big believer of you get more of what you measure. And I think this is another way that we can have an impact on youth access. So this is just one of the things we're looking at, how many times when we're out and about doing premise checks, doing other work that we're saying, oh, you look like a youthful person. Can I see your ID, please? And so this is something that is new for these reports. And then our CRI team, it is a law enforcement function. And so the enforcement division oversees it for the agency. It does support a lot of agency functions. So there's a lot of partnership with licensing. A lot of these are licensing background checks, licensing renewals for cannabis. In addition, HR for hiring. This is not reflected on this slide, but in addition to this, they did 11 employee backgrounds last month. So just a lot of work production, huge impact on public safety for the work they do. This slide is exciting to me. I know it looks pretty boring just on its face, but it's really exciting to me. That second column where it says report and analysis, and it's at 64, that is the examiner team starting to do the work that we set forth to have it do when we moved it over into the enforcement division. And in fact, some would say way back in the history books that it was first intended to do. So that is work being done to support investigations, to identify anomalies and say, hey, that's funny. What's that typed in the notes field kind of thing, right? And so this is data we're seeing with one examiner. And then we just hired an additional new hire examiner this month, and we have 2 more ready to bring on board. So I'm excited about this, and I'm excited to continue to watch it develop. And then FDA, this is another unit, as you know, we have by contract. It's just more work in the tobacco and sometimes vapor industry that is out there getting done by our FDA team. And they're seeing a compliance rate of about 80% when they're out there. So as you know, our tobacco vapor team had a compliance rate of, was it 89? We're gonna go with 89. Yeah, so you can see there's a variance there. And then finally, being transparent about our investigations and complaints on the staff side is important too. We did have 1 new complaint and investigation that is pending this month that is not complete yet. So I don't have an outcome on that either. And then I really wanted to delete this slide. This is hard for me to look at. We have 38 vacancies. We have 5 in background. The reason I don't delete this slide is because this represents so much work of our recruitment hiring team that it is amazing. And then if you look over here on the right side, one of the things that we do is ensure that we provide good solid training to the professionals that are out there representing the agency in the field. And we're doing that consistently and doing a great job. And then the final thing that I would share with you, thank you, Dustin, prior to questions, is that we've been working really hard over the past 1.5 years on a legislative fix that would ensure standardized training and certification and potential decertification for our officers. And it's been a goal of this team for many years, and it appears to be going very well right now. And so we had a meeting today with the governor's office. We have some meeting with some senators tomorrow. And so as always, we appreciate the board's support with that work too. That's all I have for you if you have questions.
Did you tell me recently that there was 1 month where the only AVNs issued were for sale to minors?
Oh yeah, we've had several months like that. Yeah.
That's, to me, telling, really telling. So there's things, of course, I mean, it's tough to run a business and all that. This part shouldn't be tough. It just fries me how much of that we see. And that if they were doing that, they could have 0 AVNs, the whole industry. I know.
Yeah, that's
I mean,
our
I know
goal,
you
right?
agree.
We would love to see that happen.
Right, that's the goal. And this one is, it's easy. We know, we look at the cases where the clerk will look at the ID, vertical instead of horizontal, and they'll still sell.
Yes.
What goes through their head?
Well, interestingly, I didn't share with you, over this past month, I had the ability to go over to Spokane and visit that office. And then I also got to go out with the Olympia team on compliance checks. And believe it or not, as much as I've been in the field, it was the first time I'd gotten to go out on compliance checks. And so to be standing there and watch it happen, and then also when you tell them what happened and then they cry and they explain that they looked at the, in one particular situation, the clerk had 3 different stickers that told her what date of birth to look for on the ID because they had vapor, cannabis, and she had looked at the wrong sticker, and it was like 2 years ago sticker that was on the cash register or something. So
well, that's a better explanation than most of what I've heard.
Sometimes it happens like that. Sometimes in one case, it was at a, believe it or not, a pizza joint. And this very youthful looking kid walks in and orders a cider. And she's opening, like literally as soon as the door opened, he walked in. And she's doing all of her other stuff and talking to her friends about what they did last night. And she just pulls down the cider and passes. So yeah, it's
and I
we're,
make mistakes.
and we're human, right?
Yes, we are.
And so and we advise, for example, if you have a no vertical IDs policy, that knocks out a lot of these.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's
But a
good
lot
one.
of them, A, don't have the policy because they want to make sales.
Or they don't check it even though they do have the policy.
And B, they just don't either enforce it. But all of the sales I watched, they checked the ID every time.
And most do. I think the majority of them do check. And the other thing is, this goes across the board. It's some of the largest companies that operate stores and mom and pop,
Mhm.
and it's every industry. I mean, it really cuts across
It
the whole
does. It
thing.
impacts everyone because it's all about the human being and whether they had a bad day or whether they
Are
believe that that
busy
person
or-
looks youthful. Like some of the
Right.
things about how we perceive people play
I
into
know.
this too. One of the things I like to say when we're talking about compliance checks is just a reminder that the actual compliance check is the great work of our officers. It's the industry's job to get this right. And we'll do a ton of education and we'll provide a ton of resource and recommendation. But the resulting number, whether it's 0% or 80%, that's not our officers' work. That's the industry's work.
No, I think the question for the agency at some point is there something we do, and the only thing I think increase penalty, right? I mean, that's not what we want to do at all in these situations, but it doesn't seem to be getting better.
Well, doing these checks actually is statistically proven to increase or
Compliance.
increase compliance or reduce youth access.
Except one of the other things that I've noticed recently is that your folks will go on, say, May 22nd and find a violation. And then they go back exactly 2 months later and they find another violation and they're told,
We're
I
gonna
think
come
they're
back.
told,
You
we're
get a
gonna come
recheck.
back, you get a recheck. Everyone knows there's a recheck and they do it again.
Mhm. Because they didn't change their practices.
Okay, well, I'll save the rest of my rant for later. Jim?
You can call me.
Just a couple of comments, and I met with folks from the Healthcare Authority yesterday, and they had a really good research brief on access, availability, and density of substance use retailers that I'm going to share with everybody. I thought it was really good. And they specifically call out the curbside delivery, and they have a set of what they call best practices that we could consider putting in place. And so I'd love to share that with everybody, and I will.
I would love to see that.
Yeah. The two things that you brought up, you always do such a great job with your presentations, and I really appreciate the data that you present. But the curbside delivery was one thing that is concerning to me as well. And then staffing. Staffing is I'm incredibly concerned about the staffing challenges that we have within the enforcement division, and anything that I can do to help just conversation-wise. I mean, I've done a lot of work on workforce challenges in the behavioral health world, and although they're obviously very different work environments, some of the strategies to reduce some of the workforce challenges, I think, overlap. And so I just want to just acknowledge that there's challenges. I don't think we can really fulfill our mission as an organization with that level of lack of staffing and that staffing challenge. So deeply concerned about that.
Thank you. And I can't share details, but so you know, we're in the middle of negotiations, so that's why I can't share details. But we are working to partner with the state and the union to do what we can to address some of those recruitment and retention issues, and sincerely appreciate your support.
Great, thank you. Okay, thank you. We will move on. And I know some people are going to have to move to other meetings too, so understood anytime somebody moves to. Next up is our legislative update, and we'll turn to Chris Thompson, our legislative director.
Good afternoon, Chairman Postman and Board Member Vollendorf and others. I'll be brief. Primarily by way of reminder on the legislative request packages that we have recently distributed. The agency is considering 3 potential agency request bills for the upcoming legislative cycle. Those bill drafts and summaries of their provisions were sent out to stakeholders last week on Thursday and are now undergoing their review. We have just begun to get some response and feedback from stakeholders. I just saw one this morning from Seattle King County Public Health with some detailed feedback. So we're also talking with Department of Agriculture. Next week, I believe we've set up some time to talk in some more detail about their reactions. So, but that process is just beginning, and we've given stakeholders until August 25th to get their feedback to us. That'll compress the timeline a little bit from what we'd originally sketched out for the agency and the board to consider all the feedback and discuss whether or not to make changes to the draft proposals. But I think with a September 14 target date for submission, hopefully we'll be able to work through that okay, even with a little bit less time at our end to do it. Rick felt like it was important to give the stakeholders 3 weeks to make their review, consult with their networks, and get back to us with any suggestions or concerns. So that's coming up. Just very quickly, the 3 items we have in circulation now. One is a proposal on social equity. That would enable the agency to increase the number of social equity retail store licenses based on population. Would permit the agency to kind of detether those licenses from a particular city or county where they have been allocated or might otherwise be allocated based strictly on population. Waive the license fee for those licensees, and a number of other provisions. I'm just giving a real high level summary here. Second proposal is a new approach from the agency request bill we had last session that didn't pass. This is on regulating products with THC, and so this proposal is envisioning establishing a threshold above which the agency would regulate products and below which they would be available in an open market. And the draft bill says 1 milligram THC per unit or 3 milligrams THC per packaged product. Above that threshold, we regulate it. You have to have a license from us to do business in those products, and all that entails. There are a few other provisions. There's a disclosure on the label requirement for any synthetically derived CBD that might be in a product, how much, and a description of that. There's some other changes that are required as scaffolding to support this proposal, particularly definitions in the Controlled Substances Act and for hemp. We're tightening this up so that the current law wouldn't be limited to Delta 9 THC as a product that we could regulate. The problem with measuring that on a dry weight basis, we fixed that by introducing this new standard and while retaining the 0.3% THC on a dry weight basis. But again, that would be all forms of THC, not just Delta 9. So those are primary provisions there, and the goal is to get the products of concern like Delta 8 gummies and such out of the market. And I won't go into a lot more detail on that, but I think board members are aware of what we have on the table. And then finally, the third measure is one that would give the agency authority to pursue a subpoena in the context of a cannabis investigation. We already have that authority related to liquor, tobacco, and vapor. But this would facilitate, particularly, for example, financial records investigations around true party of interest or hidden ownership concerns that come up from time to time in the cannabis realm, where we don't have that tool today. So those are the three proposals we've got on the table. I just add a couple of words to something Chandra mentioned a bit ago. We are not requesting legislation on the issues she brought up, but the legislature passed Senate Bill 5051 last year, 2021 session. This is law enforcement reform. There was an unintended consequence through that legislation that's problematic for our agency and other agencies with limited authority law enforcement personnel. This, I would argue, may also have implications for staffing, recruitment, and retention challenges and goals. So the Gambling Commission has decided to go the agency request route on this. So they're planning to officially request this legislation, but Chandra has been a lead for us in working with them and the other agencies involved. So that's the Office of the Insurance Commissioner, the Department of Natural Resources, State Parks, as well as the Gambling Commission and LCB are all collaborating, are basically on the same page, which kind of widened the eyes of the governor's staff, and they were very glad to hear that. Also, there's been good stakeholder work in connecting with groups like WASPIC and WACOPS to ensure there aren't any concerns there. A draft is still in the works, and we'll share that when we have a new one. The Gambling Commission, as I said, is taking the lead, but we are making sure the governor's staff is fully aware of all the developments in this conversation. And as also Chandra mentioned, tomorrow the prime sponsor of the original Senate Bill 5051, Senator Jamie Peterson, has asked to sit down with us and hear about what we're envisioning as a technical fit here. He's very interested, as are some House members. So there's really promising legislative interest, and those conversations are ongoing. But mostly the message I want to leave with you is that how encouraged people seem to be with the level of collaboration and an agreement that a very narrow technical fix is important, so that our staff have the training opportunities that make sense and that won't be punitive to them and their careers. So both those who have been with us and our legacy staff, as well as potential new recruits for staffing needs that we have, and obviously we as an agency are not alone in that regard, having needs for recruitment. So we're very hopeful about the direction that conversation is going, and I'll stop there.
Okay, great. Any questions, Chris? No. Okay. Thanks, Chris. And just we look forward to when you get that feedback and we get closer to the final things, sitting down with the board to go through them in more detail. So thanks.
You bet.
And we'll turn now to a licensing update with Becky Smith, the Licensing and Regulation Director. Hello.
So good afternoon. I'm going to try to go through this quickly, and certainly stop me if you have questions. I'm going to end with social equity. So I wanted to start with my division updates. And I would say the most concerning but important is our liquor unit, that as you may be aware, that beginning August 1st, we hired Heidi Braley. She took on a temporary role as the acting liquor manager. John Engelman has moved on to a new position in another agency. That we are seeing a high workload in our liquor unit. I would say that speaking to folks, it was probably the highest that we've seen since 1183, since we privatized. That that our current file counts are over 60 per investigator, licensing or liquor investigator. Usually it's around, the highest is probably 30, 35. And so tipping over 60 has certainly, that put us on alert for the last few months. We've seen our processing time increase. In June, processing from assignment to approval was 72 days. In the month of July, it was 98 days. That the usual processing time is about 45 days. So those folks that are applying for a liquor license, really is concerning because these are businesses that are waiting to get their liquor license. That for us, it's all hands on deck. That I've shared with the managers today that anyone that has worked a liquor file ever in our division, that they'll be working liquor files, that we can't continue with the 60 plus. And we've already approved overtime. We've already hired on new staff, but liquor is complicated and takes months for new folks that are new to our agency to understand and to be able to process applications. We are using some of our folks in the cannabis unit. The problem is that I certainly look forward to SMP because right now the systems are very, very different. And even though our senior investigators that are in cannabis are willing to help, it's just another system that they have to work from. So again, we're going to go back to seeing who has worked a liquor file and start assigning those files to those folks. So I've received a number of complaints. And again, why I share it with you today is that I assume that those will be coming your way as well. That certainly send them my way, and we're working as quickly as possible and trying to do our best in giving really good customer service. We've also have axe throwing that went into effect on June 29th. And we've received 6 applications that we have. Those go to our senior investigators because they are a bit more complicated. And we are doing double checks with our managers as well. And before approving, it's something that enforcement has committed to going out to those places to make sure that they are as they appear on the pictures that they send to us, which isn't always the case. We have approved so far one axe throwing with liquor as of August 3rd. And so for our cannabis unit, we have made some changes in our cannabis unit. I think I mentioned that at our last update after the WACA conference that we did receive some feedback. We have begun sending out letters, just welcome letters to those folks that are making changes in their application, so they know exactly who their investigator is, how much time they have to wait until they're going to receive a call back, and then some paperwork. And then after it's completed, we are checking back with them again and making sure that they had good customer service. All of those investigations will be done by phone. So there'll be phone contact. A lot of those were happening over emails. We kind of got comfortable in COVID as far as reaching out to folks. And the best customer service, again, is having those conversations. They seem to go a little bit quicker, and certainly it's helpful to the applicant. That policy and education, I do want to mention that there's going to be an upcoming small business fair. It's going to be virtual. That's September 24th. The policy and education unit will be involved in that training. We usually get a good turnout virtually. That in person, we usually have less people who attend, but last year when we attended virtually, we had quite a few folks reaching out, both about cannabis and liquor, special occasion licenses, for instance. And then back to our compliance and adjudication, there are currently four tribal negotiations going on for MOAs with the Tulalipes, Still-Quamish, Skokomish, and Lumi Nation. That those are all assigned to Nicola Reed, as you're aware, and to go over that information and get those MOAs done. We're feeling really positive about how those are going as well. And then social equity, I do just want to take a minute to talk a little bit about all of the work that's going on. That we were really excited about the rules, but that was just a start and a continuation of all of the work happening in our division. That we are working very closely with the Department of Commerce. We have a great partnership that they have a program that consists of 2 parts. One is the technical assistance model courses, and they've contracted this work and expect to go live in September. They also have a mentorship, and that's one-on-one personal mentorship facilitated from the mentor to the mentee. And this will they'll soon be accepting applications for mentors, conducting those interviews, and plan to have a list of all the mentors in January. Commerce will also be assisting with training on assisting applicants with the social equity plan. And then we have reoccurring monthly meetings and sometimes weekly meetings with them just to share the information back and forth. We've continued to do work on the DIA areas with the University of Washington. That licensing met with the task force in the UW on August 4th. That it was brought to our attention that the UW was missing some data from King County in order to complete their maps. And that is conviction data that we're working on a path forward. We're feeling positive about that path forward, crossing our fingers, that there's also some changes in the DIA formula that the UW is requesting. And we have a scheduled August 23rd meeting for them to do a presentation to the task force. I do want to let you know that if that doesn't get approved, that we will be moving forward with recommendations from licensing division on making those changes. It will open up more areas to allow for more DIA areas. So we think that would probably be the best path forward for our applicants. And then licensing division is also planning for upcoming training. So we've drafted an outreach plan that includes a combination of live workshops and recorded videos. These trainings will be held virtually. My team is drafting the outreach presentation content. We're coordinating with communication. Thank you, Brian and Sam. And we're also exploring a facilitator. We've reached out to a couple of different folks in the community, that certainly to the Department of Commerce. We really feel like we need those virtual trainings to be facilitated by someone other than LCB. And then we're looking at also having them help us with doing some recordings and training, just like they did with Department of Commerce. So the other good news is that the third-party vendor review went out. So the RFP went out. It was released last week. And in addition to posting in the usual places, we wanted to make sure there was greater visibility. So we also posted to the Office of Minority and Women Business Enterprises, OMWBE, and the Washington Procurement Technical Assistance Center. We currently had 31 people that downloaded the RFP that since it was released. That today we did a pre-proposal conference for potential bidders to ask questions. There were 3 folks that showed up. That again, very positive to hear that 3 people showed up, had questions for us. The bids are due on the 26th of August. And then, of course, we'll move on to do oral interviews for the top 3 bidders and announce the apparent successful bidder on September 9th. And then I think that the last piece is that the licensing is developing a how-to guide for those 40 applicants who are selected to go through, and I want to say now it's 41 applicants to go through the social equity licensing process so they could better understand the next steps in the licensing process. We'll be posting those guides on our website once they're complete. I think that's it. Question?
I have one. You mentioned both in terms of talking about commerce training component and what licensing is doing. What are the different areas? Are those both training for people who are applying to be in the program?
They are. So Commerce will be doing that more of a sell, how do you develop your business?
Okay.
That how do you do marketing and sales? How do you get capital and finance for your business?
Right.
And the training that we'll be doing is around how do you apply for a license.
Excellent.
So
Okay.
through BLS, we're working with BLS because they do have a really good video on how to apply. And then the step-by-step with what you'll need in order to be accepted as a social equity applicant. There'll be that piece, and then the next piece will be once they get through that application process, then the 40 that are chosen. Then how do you receive a license? So what's the next steps to making sure you get licensed, like working with the local authorities, for instance? What does your lease need to look like? What's where are you going to set up business, floor plans, for instance?
Yeah, great, good. That sounds robust. So, okay, great. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Becky. I just quick comment. You brought up the systems modernization project when you were talking about the two different. I'm assuming that, so it sounds like, and again, I'm still learning here, but liquor and cannabis each have separate systems, and the systems modernization project will make those systems similar. Are there other ways in which the systems modernization project will help expedite the work that happens in licensing?
It will. So right now with the different systems, for instance, on the liquor side, a lot of the work is paperwork. That even though we send it out, that they can send one piece of information back at a time.
Mm-hmm.
On the cannabis side, that they have to send it all back. It's all or nothing. If they don't have a completed packet, it won't launch and send it back to us. So the processing time goes quicker in cannabis because of that. And so that's one thing. The other is toggling between systems. We only have one system in cannabis. In liquor, we have two systems that we have to look in.
Okay, thank you. So it sounds like that's highlighting another need for the system modernization project to continue, and everybody's eager for that, obviously.
We really are, and we're eager to see it. You be able to look at your, that you can order a pizza and find out where your pizza is. Like, where am I? Has it left? Has it started cooking? We want you to be able to do the same thing for your application. You should be able to go in and say, has it been assigned to an investigator? Do I have all my paperwork? Am I missing anything? And right now, our systems just don't allow that to happen.
Yeah. Well, thank you for the great update. You guys are obviously working really hard. So just commending you and your team for the work that you do. And appreciate the update.
Thank you.
And by the way, I did send you a couple of emails too. I think we are making progress. I've got some, on the data request.
Very excited.
Good.
Thanks, Jim.
Good. I'm only disappointed. I thought you were about to tell us that SNP was going to allow us to order pizza. Really would be great.
I don't think it's too late. I think it's still in process. We might be able to get that in there, David.
Yeah, that's true. Let's put in a change order. Thank you, Becky. And now Brian Smith, our communications director.
Thank you, Chair Postman, Board Member Vollendroff, and colleagues. Touch on some highlights that's been impacting communications, or that we're impacting. We always start off with media. Since the last time I spoke, we have seen an uptick in media, but for no particular specific theme or particular issue that's kicking off everything. You've heard me say before that we get about 1 to 2 media contacts per day. May not sound like much. It's more than every agency. Every agency sees. Most agencies will go a month without seeing more than 1 or 2, but we get them every day. It's part of our everyday work. Just so you understand that, it's because there's so much interest in all of the things that we do. The uptick, I think, had to do with several issues that seemed to be isolated and localized, which there were a lot of questions, maybe by a single reporter or more, but we have seen more of that in the last month. It's been quiet for the last week, though, I would say. Coming up, we will be doing an interview. Ollie, Board Member Garrett, will be doing an interview with the Seattle TV station with regards to social equity. Provided a lot of background data, et cetera, to the reporter that's looking into this. We'll be working with Dustin and getting time scheduled in the next 2 weeks or so with Board Member Garrett to carry that out. Obviously, she's a leader on that subject, and look forward to having her have the opportunity to talk about her good work on that. Some of the other major things, as you know, that House Bill 1210 directed the state to change references from marijuana to cannabis in all the RCWs and the WACs. Well, we have embraced it in the agency to make that change across the board everywhere else. And many of us have been using the term for the last few years anywhere, but it still existed across the board in places we couldn't change because they were directed specific to the rule or specific to the law. And that requires us to keep that. But on my team, particularly Brad Rinke and Sam Gooder, dove deep into this, working with the divisions to make this change, and pretty much swiped out all of the things on the website with IT's help to run a last minute test to see what's still out there, and we cleaned it all up. The only thing that still remains out there that we found is some references in the old press releases. And in fact, when we did a clean find and replace, it did too good of a job, and it replaced all those references back in the early days of legalization. And I thought it was important that for legacy reasons, for historical reasons, that we keep that marijuana term for those initial years. And I went back and manually, me and my team, and we made those changes, and that's going to remain so that people, it's keeping history exactly the way it was.
Yeah.
Thank you. And then, so that's all. If you do go out and you do check something I just learned myself on the legislature's page, the references to our wax, there are some references that are still there that say marijuana. Kathy Hoffman explained to me that that's because we have an open rulemaking that touch on those particular wax. And so if you have an open rulemaking, you can't make that change until we're complete with our rulemaking. So half of them have changed, or majority of them have changed, but they're still to come. Just so if you see that, you're interested as to why. The social equity stuff, as Becky touched on so many things that licensing is doing. When the rules came out, we went back in and cleaned up the social equity section of our website. That's the first thing you see when you bring up our website is our work on social equity. Put the rules in there and put some plain language as to where we are currently with the implementation and the preparation, I guess, for that. Two of the key documents, including the rules, we had translated into Spanish, so they're available, and people want to be able to access it through that channel. That's available on a website, as we will with key documents as we go through this entire process. Now that we are at the position that Becky explained where we're at, Sam on my team and I will kind of be embedded, sort of say, with the licensing division and that leadership team going forward, so that we're working together to be able to do all the things that we need to do as an agency, and communication and getting the word out about how to do all this stuff is going to be critical as well. So they're a great team always to work with. And I personally will make it my top priority. Is my husband my top priority for what I intend to be doing over the next several months, right, clearing the decks for everything else. I can't ever totally do that, but that's my top priority. And I share that responsibility with my team to make sure we're covering everything else. One key thing that came up that was kind of an interesting sidebar is that back in May, we had worked with the United States Cannabis Council. They were doing some advertising and some messaging around the Safe Banking Act, the Federal Safe Banking Act. And a media team basically sent by the Cannabis Council came here. I prepared some things for Chandra to be able to communicate in these ads or whatever, these discussions with these guys that came in. It's a film crew. You just do some stuff and you talk and you left. And then a month later it comes back and they show the ads that they created, of which Chandra is a key part of those ads. And they came out and they look excellent. If you haven't seen that, it's posted on our agency intranet. You can see the ads, etc. But then I was contacted in mid-July, and they asked her back to be part of a congressional briefing, joining some key members of the Senate and the House from Oregon and Perlmutter from Colorado, to brief other members of Congress and staff and media about efforts to get safe banking passed before the August recess. And so she participated virtually in this congressional briefing on July 27th. Joining her as part of that thing was Mr. Brown, who's the father of Jordan Brown, the young man that was murdered at a Tacoma cannabis store, and as well as a retail store owner. Chandra talked about all the work that we've done with the leadership, Chair Postman, to be able to help our licensees get access at least to security assessments, to learning new tools, to all the things that we're providing to retailers and to licensees right now to help with the scare around robberies, all because, you know, it's a cash-only business. And so if you haven't seen those yet, I encourage you to go and watch those ads and take a look at Chandra's feature, but it's pretty cool. I served as kind of a liaison between the governor's office and the DC office and making sure that everyone was on the same page with that. They encouraged us to go through this. I thank the governor's office for being open, for having us participate in something like this that we know is so important to our licensees as a public safety measure. And then just something that you might be interested in is that we publish 2 newsletters on a quarterly basis. One is for cannabis licensees, one is for alcohol licensees. A lot of the content comes up through the divisions. Some of the content is original to us. We publish this on Medium, but when we put it out, we hit a broad audience on that. I mean, just our self-subscribed lists that we maintain just for this, we have over nearly 17,000 on the cannabis side and nearly 12,000 on the alcohol side. So that's people that want this, that have asked us for it, they get it, but we send it to an even broader, sometimes whether they ask for it or not, but hey, they're gonna get it. It's good. Typically we hope to have an easy read with some photos and stuff. And we post those also to our website, but thanks to my team and to the divisions that helped crank that out. We put them out, the summer issues in July, and they're out there now. And then I guess lastly is just Mary Sagawa came, our public health education liaison, came to the management team recently and talked through some findings conducted by the University of Waterloo in Ontario around particularly about cannabis use, et cetera, and various things. And there was some data that came out of that from those surveys that was insightful and some of the things that we haven't had access to. So I'm working with Mary and with Rick on isolating, I think, some key analyses from that we want to make available to the public. You'll hear more on that later, but that will be happening, I believe, over the next couple of weeks, is getting something together on that and something we can be able to communicate about the impact of legalization overall, which I saw some very positive things that came out that were insightful, that I get asked about from the media, that I now have access to, at least something that we can point to going forward.
Usage and things.
Particularly about usage, about where people access cannabis. We are seeing, I can tell you that, is a very high rate of accessing our stores as opposed to the illicit market, which is a question I get a lot, upwards as much as potentially as 90% using stores. And when you ask that question, it included people that were under the age of 21. That's a question that often comes up. It's going to be hard to reach 100% using the stores because there is a market for people under the age of 21 for cannabis. And our original consultants on this, which is Botec, always baked that into the numbers and made sure that we explain that when we talk to people about access to cannabis. So more to come on that, but that's something that we'll be doing going forward. And that's, I guess, about it. If there's questions.
Any questions, Jim?
I have no questions, but again, thank you for the update, Brian. Amazing work that's happening, and thank you.
Great. Thanks, Brian.
You're welcome.
Okay, and we'll turn to Justin Nordhorn, our Director of Policy and External Affairs. Hello, Justin.
Good afternoon, Chair Postman and Member Wallendroff. So a lot of work going on. I won't, a lot of crossover with what you've already heard. So I'll touch base on a few different areas. As you're well aware from caucus and board meetings in the past several weeks, we've been receiving a lot of rule petitions. And so my staff has really been, trying to dig into those. And, we're having some conversations around the proposals. And so just kind of putting out a primer, we're not sure where things are going to land to present yet to the board. But we're really trying to explore opening conversation and dialogue with stakeholders so that, we get the best feedback that we can. And that doesn't necessarily mean that the end result is a formal rule that comes out of the other side. So, we're really trying to take a look at that process and embrace the engagement, if you will, with folks. So I think that will be something you'll hear, particularly from Kathy as she's going to present some of that information to you in the upcoming meetings. So I just kind of wanted to put that out there. We also have, along with those, if we are recommending, and again, nothing's official or final yet that what we're going to present. But if we do, because we've got so many of these things in, if staff are recommending the exploration of a CR 101 for rulemaking, that won't necessarily mean that we can do all of those at the same time. So just because if you all decide to approve something, that doesn't mean that we're going to open it immediately, because we have to prioritize that work in order to be able to get it done, and we can't take it all on. So I also wanted to put that out there, because although we may have an interest in exploring some of this, we may not have capacity to do all of everything. So we want to make sure that those pieces of work that we have that are active, and then the other pieces of work coming in, that we're coordinating with the other divisions to make sure, okay, do we have capacity to be able to do this, not only within my team, but the rest of the agency on how we can explore and make sure that we're moving things forward in the timely manner under the APA. And so in order to set ourselves up for success, we need to be mindful of that. We've been doing some more work around, as you heard, the 1480 study. So I've talked with the vendor CDM last few weeks. We did have a few hiccups trying to get some data from locations. So we're actually trying to be supportive and help with that conversation with the other data source locations to try to get that data in. So what we're seeing is our first interim report is due on October 1st. And then the final report, I believe, is November 1st. But we are going to have a draft that we're going to be able to see beforehand. And in that draft, it won't necessarily cover all of the data analysis, because they're not going to have it all before they start working on that interim, the pre-draft, if you will, to share with us to say, okay, is this the direction on the reporting and the dashboard and those types of things. So, we're going to be trying to make sure that those things are categorized as, okay, here's the analysis, but this other data is still pending to be incorporated, because there's going to have to be that analysis in the following weeks after that initial draft that we see at the beginning of September. So, I think we're seeing some really good things, really good questions from them. They have gone through the predominant amount of both the quantitative and qualitative data. And so they've been doing interviews with stakeholders, and I think they're down to one left. So it's really moving forward in the right direction. We've also been looking at other type of planning. We've been exploring, and I know there's some awareness of it, but we're trying to explore on how we can set our organization up to be, I guess, better in line with the being able to access research, and what are some of the most up-to-date scientific studies, and et cetera, et cetera. So we're looking at how do we look at those issues? How do we assess whether or not some of our policies and rules predominantly are meeting the needs that we thought they would? And as an example, we were going through it this last year and said, hey, we're going to look at this for a period of time, and then we'll come back and do an assessment. So we're really trying to make sure that, okay, let's line up how we're going to do this assessment, and did this meet the intended needs that we were looking for. So we're working on those particular issues as well. Working on doing some more outreach to the medical cannabis community. I've talked to folks locally and nationally on some of these issues. I've been looking at other states and what their programs look like, and then comparing that with some of the other feedback from folks, and say, okay, this one looks promising. What do you think? And then I get a slightly different perspective. And so I think it's really good to balance that and say, okay, what's working, what's not working? What would this look like as we try to move that needle forward? I think one of the things that is good to recognize for us on some of just a comparable analysis, because we don't have a robust register in the state where a lot of people are participating. You have to kind of use some of the neighboring data and averages in other areas to use as the comparable. What we're seeing is, we probably have, in the state database, I think there's roughly around 13,000 people plus in the database. I would estimate, just based on looking at those variables, and this is not a hard and fast number, but I would estimate there's somewhere between 80 and 85,000 based on population and comparable numbers that other states utilize for that. So that's kind of alarming to say, okay, what's going on within that system? When we look at the state database, going back to 2020, we had a decrease of 7.8% use in that to 2021, another 5.4% decrease from 7.8 from 19 to 20, and then 20 to 21, we had a 5.5% decrease, and then from 21 to 22, we've also seen over a 5% decrease. So the numbers have been dropping on the utilization of that, and so I think it's really important for us on a policy level to look at, what can we do and partner with Department of Health, with the legislature on trying to figure out, how to make some of these systems, meet the intended goals of what some of the past legislation was. And I think that's really important for us to be looking at. So we're diving into all of those types of things, kind of piggybacking on one of the things that Brian said, some of the data in that report, kind of jumped out, and we're trying to vet that with, okay, why would this be, anything that's an identifiable gap? And we don't have all the answers right now, so I don't want to throw out too many specifics, but what's the purpose or what's the reason for some of those gaps, and how do we explain that? How do we identify that so that we can problem solve in a more effective manner? To Becky's comments earlier on the social equity front, we have been engaged in a couple different work groups as an organization, providing feedback to those work groups to try to maintain, the interest that we have towards social equity and the commitment that we have based on all of our work that we're doing and the legislation that we had introduced. We want to make sure that the recommendations are meaningful and that we can be there if they are, that we can support them. And if we aren't, if they're not quite where we think they are, to be able to say, I don't think that we're there yet on these issues, because we really do want to see that moving towards social equity and not general business type of impacts. And then the last thing I'll share, we've also been working with CANRA on some of the committee work there. And we're trying to put together an explainer in one of the committees for general purposes across the United States, whether it's legislators or stakeholders or whoever it may be, an explainer on, kind of what does hemp look like in the current state, and what does it mean based on that 0.3% THC on a dry weight basis. And so, just as a snapshot, when you're looking at a 0.3% on a dry weight basis for a liquid, that's about a third of a teaspoon or 1.7 grams that would contain one dose of THC, which has been identified recently as a 5 milligram threshold. That's a baseline standard that they're using for research. And so we have 10 milligrams in our standard serving. 5 milligrams is what we recognize as research. And in that 5 milligram, you're talking about 1.7 grams, a third of a teaspoon. So really low amount. And if you look at like a chocolate bar, an 85-gram chocolate bar, it can have up to 255 milligrams in there under the current state of that 0.3%. So kind of piggybacking back to what Chris has said, we're really trying to look at what's the appropriate threshold. Where can we have those issues come forward and be able to identify what's appropriate and what's not for regulation. And so what the legislation that we're doing is trying to create the cutoff similar to alcohol so that we know what should be regulated, what shouldn't be regulated, and that it's easy to understand for everybody. And so when we're looking at that front, there'll be a lot more to come, as Chris pointed out, so I won't go into all the details at this point, but there are some studies that we have found talking about the lowest observable adverse effect levels and the no observable adverse effect levels of THC. And I think that our proposal fits right in there very nicely. So you'll hear more about that coming in the future. So that's kind of what we've been trying to bite off in the policy area.
Great. I just want to endorse what you said about the work you're doing around the medical piece. I mean, you're right. It was legislatively directed. They did set up law. It's also in the LCB strategic plan that we advanced that. I really feel like we have an obligation and So good on you for doing that, and let us know what the board can do to help that process, and let's try to advance it as best we can. I think it's important.
Excellent, thank you.
Anything from?
Yeah, I'd just like to add that you brought up the research data evaluation. I think that that's an incredibly important part of the work that we are doing and we should continue to do. There's incredible work happening at the local level, whether it's the counties and or the University of Washington or our Washington State University or elsewhere, that I think we can learn so much from and tap into and look at how can we advance the work that we're doing. So I appreciate the work in that area.
Absolutely.
And thank you for the update.
Jim, have you seen the Waterloo report? Did that get circulated? The one that Brian mentioned?
I don't know that I have, but it doesn't mean that it's not buried in my email, unfortunately. But I'll definitely look, and if it's not there, I'll reach out to Brian and get a copy.
Great. Yeah, it's pretty interesting. So, and it also gets at some of what Justin was talking about with medical use as well. So there's a lot of interesting things there. So, okay, those are our agenda items, other than just a last call for any additional updates. I know we've lost some of the staff, but anything at all? Board member comments? Member Vollendroff, anything?
No, just again to thank everybody for the updates. I'm glad this meeting is recorded so that if I ever have to miss one of these meetings, I can go back and watch the recording, because there's so much great information that's passed on here. So just really appreciate the work, and it highlights the important work that we do and the important work that's happening within each of the sections of the LCB. And I really do deeply appreciate the updates and highlights. And look, when I listen to these, I look for opportunities about where I can be of assistance. And so don't hesitate to reach out if there's opportunities that I'm missing that you think you could use help in, and that I could be of assistance.
Yeah, great point. Yeah, and I think, your comments about the need to help enforcement and education fill 35 spots or whatever that is well taken. We've got to do what we can. So thanks for bringing that up. Okay, thank you, everybody. Join us. We will be back next week for caucus, I suppose, and a board meeting too next week. So until then, we'll adjourn the executive management team meeting for Wednesday, August 10th, 2022. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Bye.